By downloading the game that they have been waiting for years, gamers from all over the world expect to have a good time in these projects, but as a result they remain completely disappointed. After getting acquainted with such novelties, there's only one desire: to contact the support service and request a refund. Wonder Thunder cares about you and your health, so we have selected the top 10 failed video game launches of all time. Now, Sean Murray is usually praised, and No Man's Sky is set as an example of how to break out of the dirt into riches. Thanks to the efforts of the Hello Games, the game began to resemble the very dream promised back in 2013. Only at the start, people were not waiting for a complete disappointment.
This is not okay. This needs to stop now.
During the development, the head of the company managed to attract a lot of attention to his creation. For advertising, the team did not hold back, handing out promises right and left. Procedural generation was the main feature promoted everywhere, allowing the creation of hundreds of millions of unique planets throughout the galaxy. But after the release, it turned out that in the desolate sky, there is not even half of what was promised. Technically, No Man's Sky was terrible. There were frequent crashes, deletion of saves, and many could not even start the game at all. Those lucky ones who managed to do this were consistently stuck on the endless loading screen. The gameplay itself was an endless repetition of the same thing: collecting resources, crafting items, trading, and exploring boring planets. Procedural generation gave rise to unprecedented mutants who looked rather comical and destroyed the whole atmosphere. In addition, it was completely absent online, since the studio did not have the opportunities to support it. To top it all off, there were the crooked flight controls and a terrible combat system. After a justified anger from gamers and months of silence, Sean Murray admitted all the mistakes. Hello Games actively took up the fix and eventually bringing it to the state close to the original idea. But the team did not stop there, continuing to actively improve and expand the project, and is still doing so. The case with No Man's Sky is a rare episode when the project was able to be fixed after a failed release. Many developers have begun to take a more balanced approach to promotion. Many, but not all. There are projects that were initially doomed to a cold reception. Metal Gear Survive falls into this category. The game's fiasco was a result of rash and hasty decisions by Konami management. The cancellation of the new Silent Hill and the scandalous departure of Hideo Kojima turned the entire gaming community against the Japanese publisher. Therefore, the announcement of Survive was perceived by many extremely negatively, having prepared for low ratings in advance. Fortunately, the developers themselves provided a reason for criticism. At the mention of Metal Gear, giant mechs, a multi-layered plot, charismatic characters, and even a stealth box come to mind. The authors replaced all this with simple survival. The studio took the work of the Phantom Pain and molded them into something that at best would be an expressive add-on. The audience reacted extremely sharply to the changes in the established gameplay and the absence of iconic heroes. Poor design oozed from every frame, and the story looked illogical even within the framework of a video game. The game received mostly negative reviews from buyers. Complaints focused on the game's genre and the theme recycled assets from Metal Gear Solid 5, microtransactions, constant internet connection requirement, and the departure from the general feel of previous Metal Gear games. But the main problem lay in the features of Metal Gear. It is difficult to imagine a more author's universe than MGS, strongly associated with the personality of its ideological inspirer. Therefore, the new part of the series, created without the participation of the genius, drowned in the righteous anger of the players, and Konami shelved the franchise. Long before Cyberpunk 2077, buyers of Alien Colonial Marine became victims of a massive marketing campaign. Gearbox Software promised Alien fans the best game in the world with many unique features. To be convincing, the studio did not stand on returning Lance Henriksen and Michael Biehn to their previous roles. The players believed every word of Randy Pitchford and waited patiently. But instead of a breakthrough, gamers got a technically outdated, scripted shooter with faded graphics, bugs, inexpressive shooting, uninspiring gameplay, and a confusing scenario. The point of the plot was that due to a single typo in the configuration file, the entire artificial intelligence module broke down and the deadly xenomorphs turned into stupid cannon fodder. The only thing that came out more or less successful was the Bug Hunt add-on with co-op for 4. The problem wasn't the false advertising that created high expectations, or the deceitful gameplay videos that gamers were fed. It turned out that a Gearbox outsourced development to a third-party studios, while it was working on the second Borderlands. Randy Pitchford's company actually lied to people. Because of this approach, the concept changed dramatically several times. Work was repeatedly suspended, and Sega, dissatisfied with the transfers, almost sued. In order to meet the deadline, Gearbox urgently finalized the already finished material and at the same time cutting off most of the planned chips, so the raw and untested product hit the shelves, which almost buried Alien Isolation. The main problem of Far Cry 6 is that it's just another Far Cry, albeit with cockfights, a strong protagonist, and charming amigos, to the point of screeching. Cockfights, by the way, have become one of the reasons for the uproar. From the start of the sales, animal rights activists, so far to no avail, demand to remove cruel entertainment, but aggressive birds are far from the main reason for the low user rating of Far Cry 6. Far Cry 6 is not much different from its older counterparts. The same gameplay, the same outpost captures, only this time Ubisoft decided to please its audience with a story about how farmers, vegan school children, and trans rappers are trying to overthrow a tyrant. And everything works out for them. After all, they stand for everything good against everything bad. In terms of gameplay in Far Cry 6, almost nothing has changed. Only some minor additions to the main gameplay have been added. Therefore, this is the same Far Cry as 11 years ago, when the third part came out. The item system that Ubisoft introduced in Far Cry 6 both adds variety and kills it. It is no longer possible to pick up someone else's weapons. The set of weapons is fixed. You can find new types of weapons only in special chests that are scattered around the map, or you can buy them from merchants after reaching the next level, but it costs a lot.
Hello! I like money!
Towards the end, you simply find the optimal layout of 3 types of guns and periodically change one of the positions to heavy weapons in order to shoot down helicopters and planes. The technical part of the game is as uninspiring as everything else. Bad optimization, exorbitant system requirements for high settings, incorrect determination of the amount of video card memory, unloading textures. These are just a small part of the problems that we had to face in the game from Ubisoft. In general, the project no doubt turned out to be at least beautiful, but with a huge number of disadvantages. Sometimes you want to return to the days of Far Cry 3 and quote one charismatic pirate named Was Montenegro. Insanity is doing the exact same thing over and over again, expecting things to change. But Ubisoft had clearly forgotten about these words. There is nothing revolutionary in the history of revolution. Actually, there is nothing more to say about Far Cry 6. In general, Battlefield 2042 somehow works and sometimes even gives pleasant emotions. But more often, positive impressions are washed away by waves of problems and shortcomings of a different nature. At release, the game had a huge number of bugs. Sometimes it even came to the point where users did not deal damage when shooting at close range and could not resurrect teammates during the whole match. Performance problems, bugs, crooked network code, and not so user-friendly interface. Battlefield 2042 has remained true to the sad traditions of the series.
No! God, please, no! No! No!
The conversations about the scale of the map and storytelling through gameplay were interesting, but the huge maps turned out to be simply boring. As a result, the maps turned out to be, well, too large, which is why the concentration of battles decreased. Cataclysms quickly became boring, and specialists became a poor substitute for traditional classes. Their skills were not really balanced, which caused the superiority of some fighters over others. And only an archaeologist or a fan of Miyazaki's work can dig out a plot in a battle. But most people is unlikely to spend time on this, and even more people will not dare to call it a plot. Similarly, you can criticize combat, a meager arsenal, a mediocre hazard zone mode, and many other aspects. But even without that, Battlefield 2042 has already earned itself a spot on our list. Capture the flag on giant maps quickly becomes extremely boring, and for the map breakthrough, the dimensions are clearly excessive. If you add technical problems, questions about the assessment quickly disappear. Heads are expected to roll after that. Oscar Gabrielson left DICE, and Rebecca Kutaz, who previously ran Ubisoft Annecy, took over as general manager. The leadership of the series, which is planned to be united into one universe, was the legend of game development, Vince Zampella, the father of another well-known rival franchise, Call of Duty. Whether things change for the better, only time will tell. At the same time, sales of Battlefield came out by no means so disastrous. According to insiders, 2042 lost to the third part, but bypassed the first and the fourth. However, fans of the series were unhappy with the direction taken by the developers of Battlefield 2042. The players met the announcement of the new part of Mass Effect with enthusiasm. The development went relatively smoothly. The release was postponed only once, and the bugs from the trailer were sworn to be fixed. In anticipation for an epic return to the famous series, many tried not to notice the increasingly louder sounding alarm bells. The game came out and reproduced the effect of an exploding bomb with a minus sign. Terrible technical condition, clumsy animations, monotonous planets, boring gameplay, no feeling of a pioneer, and it was only the beginning. The plot did not develop the universe in any way, since the authors chose to follow the path of simplification, taking the characters to another galaxy. Moreover, fans accused the developers of deliberately spoiling the appearance of female characters in favor of the ideas of political correctness and feminism. The main reason for the failure was mismanagement. The studio could not decide on the concept for a long time, which is why it wasted a lot of time. The authors were so desperate for fresh ideas that they had to turn to the community for help. The imposed Frostbite engine produced a great picture, but it lacked the tools and systems needed for an RPG. The divisions constantly clashed and accused each other of sabotage. Due to a lack of time and labor, animations and cutscenes were outsourced to third-party teams. After many attempts, Andromeda managed to be repaired, but only partially, and the stigma of terrible Mass Effect will remain with her forever. After a short time, due to a flurry of criticism, as well as weak sales of the game, it was decided to stop supporting it and cancel all planned single editions. After high-profile failures, Anthem was supposed to be the salvation of BioWare, but the looter-shooter did not take off and instead of indulgence, finished off the studio, leading to the departure of the last veterans. Active work on Anthem in the bowels of the company has been in full swing since 2014. Mass Effect Original Trilogy executive producer Casey Hudson dreamed of a great project that will be talked about as a work of art and remembered for years to come, but there was no clear vision, and the whole concept consisted of desperate ideas. The authors also promised a well-developed world and beautiful landscapes, saying that they almost curbed the capricious Frostbite. But it was at this point that Casey Hudson had left the lineup, which was the beginning of the end. Management failed to effectively build a workflow. According to the recollections of the employees, the studio did not work out a chosen mechanics, and the solution of even simple problems was constantly postponed until later. Constant pressure led to a rush, which is why many elements simply did not have time to be finished. EA was throwing its main resources at other games like FIFA, regarding Anthem almost on a leftover basis. It is not surprising that the output turned out to be a faceless fantasy, woven from the chips of other virtual works. Another problem was that Anthem didn't have a goal. An attempt to unite two different groups of players turned out to be a failure. Neither fans of single-player adventures, nor fans of multiplayer liked the end result. Initially, the developers announced their intention to relaunch Anthem 2.0, but the first results were not impressive. The work was curtailed, and people were distributed to other projects of the company, like the new Mass Effect and Dragon Age. Another part of the staff returned to support Star Wars: The Old Republic. Perhaps no other release was accompanied by such a number of scandals as Fallout 76. Bethesda's decision to move the series to a multiplayer caused distrust from the very beginning. The complexity lay in the franchise itself. It relied very heavily on the setting, the feeling of loneliness, and the plot. Not the most experienced developers were involved in the creation of the game, who were forced to suffer with an obsolete and repeatedly rewritten engine that was absolutely not suitable for online. Not surprisingly, the result was a set of code overflowing with bugs of varying severity, terrible optimization, outdated graphics, janky animations, broken shooting have never pleased the players. The feeling of the world also suffered. The limit of 24 people on a huge map and the lack of live NPC with a well-developed story ironically turned the local expanses into a wasteland. Quests were monotonous tasks, randomly generated. The authors managed to completely break PvP and PvE, because of which the gameplay caused only boredom. Gamers found strange ways to entertain themselves, sometimes running into strange reactions from tech support. Bethesda did not think to stop there, continuing to get into scandals. The company got hit for almost everything: the sale of repair kits, the leakage of personal data, unfair bans, paid servers by subscription, statements and only excuses that angered the fans. And then they finished up the situation with the collector's edition, where canvas bags were made of cheap nylon and the bottle of dark rum was ordinary plastic. Even though Bethesda later managed to rectify the situation and fix Fallout 76, the initial fail was forever imprinted in history. For years, Ubisoft's pipelined approach to its franchises has been fully justified by good sales. But in 2019, the well-established mechanism failed, and the company failed where it succeeded best, in sequels and open worlds. After the release of a good sandbox Ghost Recon Wildlands, Ubisoft Paris increased its staff and hired the brutal Punisher Jon Bernthal for the sequel, and just as loudly failed. The game contained all the standard Ubisoft sores, only multiplied by 2. Bugs, graphics issues, an empty plot, disgusting physics, empty dialogues, monotonous tasks. It soon became unbearably tiring to play. If there had been a most boring adventure nomination, Breakpoint would have won it with ease. The gameplay of the new part of Ghost Recon resembled a set of disparate and interfering mechanics, mostly due to the MMO elements. Separate criticism was given to the active imposition of built-in store where you can buy anything. The only bright spot was Cole Walker, the character of Jon Bernthal, but it is catastrophically small, and even then they didn't finish it. Terrible facial animation brought the efforts of a professional actor to a naught. The loud fiasco directly affected the French company. Ubisoft shares plunged 20%, and all planned releases had to be postponed and sent for polishing. After analyzing the errors, the management changed the approach to development. The pauses between the releases of new games increased, and they began to pay more attention to unique features and innovations. The failure of Cyberpunk 2077 is a textbook example of how leadership's ambitions and a bet on marketing led to a collapse. Even the impeccable reputation of CD Projekt Red and a huge credit of trust did not save the studio from the righteous wrath of the players. The polished PR machine began to gain momentum in 2018 with the release of the first trailer. Beautiful shots of Night City under the peppy track. Wow! Then the first demonstration of the gameplay took place, and there is an awareness that something large-scale is being prepared. Expectations peaked at E3 2019 when Keanu Reeves delivered the famous "You're breathtaking, no you're breathtaking" line. It didn't matter that the actor spoke only in general terms. What mattered was the effect of the appearance itself. Cyberpunk 2077 was the game of the year even before its release. It was only then that everything suddenly went wrong. Several delays followed, giving rise to a meme with yellow background. But gamers smiled and waited for the video game we'll all fall in love with. After all, what bad can happen? It's CDPR itself.
I'm stronger. I'm smarter. I'm better. I am better!
In December 2020, the project finally came out, and a wave of indignation swept over the entire gaming community. If the release version for PC still somehow worked, the chaos that was happening on consoles was horrible. Critical bugs, constant crashes, breaks, glitches, NPCs out of thin air, terrible physics, videos with the corresponding content quickly flooded YouTube. Due to the short development time, many implant chips had to be cut out, and variability was reduced to a minimum. Promptly issued patches could not rectify the situation and only added headaches. The incident turned out to be so deplorable that Sony had to remove the game from the PS Store for 6 months. After the disastrous release, the studio's shares lost 57% in value, and financial losses reached 1 billion Polish zlotys. It was then revealed that CD Projekt co-founder Michael Kaczynski has sold the company's shares for about 230 million Polish currency, or $57 million. Kaczynski got rid of shares on December 4th, 3 days before the gaming publications began publishing reviews of Cyberpunk 2077. From everywhere there were demands to fire the management, and anonymous employees began to report poor work planning. Frustrated investors have filed a class action lawsuit over misrepresentation about the state of Cyberpunk 2077. The halo of the saviors of the industry has finally evaporated. It has been top 10 failed video game launches of all time. Do you agree with our list? Did you enjoy the video? Do you hate when your favorite games turn out to be a buggy mess? Well then leave a like, subscribe, and I'm going to see you in the next one.